Okay, hello. I have my hand cam today. My microphone's in a different spot than usual, so hopefully you can hear everything okay. I'm just going to talk about last year. It's a new year. Happy New Year. And, I was just on vacation, so we'll talk about vacation and my plans for next year. So that's the agenda for today. And hello, Elephant Puppet. I'm doing pretty good, even though I just got back from vacation, which means I go back to work in 2 days. But other than that, I'm doing pretty good. So I went to see some family for Christmas and for the New Year, and that's on the other side of the country. So, all right, you can hear me. That's good. So yeah, all that's on the other side of the country. So I was over there, and I got to see my family, got to see my mom's cats, all that good stuff. And I got some presents. I'll show you what I got. And then we'll talk about other stuff. So I got the Dune Saga. You'll notice one book is missing. It's still on my bed. I'm almost done with it, but I'm looking forward to reading that. I saw the old movie a long time ago. And I liked it. I've always been interested in reading the books, and so now I have the books. And shipping with Amazon, you always get the obligatory damage on your books when you ship through Amazon. There's that, and this whole case thing is torn right there. It's just what you get. It's like the Amazon seal of quality. Like, hey, some Guatemalan threw your shit across the warehouse. Have fun. Put Zatsudan? No. There's that, and then I got the Collected Tales of Nikolai Gogol. I don't know really how to pronounce his name, but I've been put on his stuff, as you'll see when I go through the books that I read last year. I've been reading a lot of it, and here's the list of short stories that are in there. Some of these I've already read, just because he put his stuff out in these collections of short stories, and then when it gets translated into English, everything is like selected works or whatever. So it's hard to find stuff in kind of the original collection. But this, along with what I already have, should cover a decent amount of his work. So I'm looking forward to reading that. And also, I'll probably read this one, The Night Before Christmas, tonight and tomorrow, because he was a Russian author, and Christmas over there is on the 7th. So tomorrow will be the night before Christmas. So what better time to read it? And then this one's kind of shiny. I need to be careful. Last time I got my face in a reflection of a shiny book. So here's Stuka Pilot by Hans Rudel. He's kind of, I guess, one of the greatest fighter pilots ever, I'd say, or bomber, maybe. I think it was a bomber. Let's see, does it say? No, but I think he was a bomber pilot. It was a fun day. No doxing. Okay. And he was he flew for the Nazis, but he was very decorated and had a interesting career. So I'm interested in seeing that. I think it's a autobiography. Yeah. So I read another autobiography from a German pilot, and it was pretty good. You know, it's a perspective you don't usually get to see, and he gave a lot of insight into kind of the pre-war German times. And he talked about refugees from Poland. He actually interacted with some of them. So a lot of the times you hear nowadays that that's just kind of a myth, but at least in some respects, there were real stories about it. And I didn't take account of the books that I read last year, so that's it for what I got for Christmas. I got a few other things, but for the books, that's all. The other stuff is just kind of personal things from family and whatnot. So I'm not going to show that. But I'll go through what I read last year. I think it was a pretty productive year as far as reading goes. I have a lot of stacks of books. You know, I'm always trying to cut back on my book buying, and it never seems to work out. You know, I'll be like, okay, it's been a while. I'll go to the bookstore, and then I just buy so much stuff. It doesn't help that less than a 10-minute drive away from me is probably the biggest bookstore I've ever seen. Maybe one of the biggest in the country, I don't know. I'm sure it's up there. I mean, people come from out of state just to shop at this bookstore. So it's a big location. Everyone loves it. And you can get a lot of good stuff for cheap. But I read a little over 30 books. I didn't take a real count, but I counted 30, and then I also read a few ebooks. So I know there are people that just like plow through books and read I know a girl at work was saying she read 70 last year or something. I can't do that anymore. Maybe when I was a teenager, you just go home and get the new Harry Potter and be done with it over the weekend. But nowadays, I can't just plow through a book like that. Especially the kind of books I read. They're usually a little dense, a little dry. Some might call them boring. So I'll just go in the order that I read them in for the year. And we'll start with, or I started with, David Hume's An Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding. So I read his Treatise of Human Nature 2 years ago, maybe a couple years ago, we'll just say. And I was interested in reading his inquiries. So I still haven't read his second inquiry. I just read this one. But his treatise he wrote when he was 23, which is pretty young, I'd say, for trying to uncover the secrets of human nature. It's pretty young. And so later in life, he decided to kind of expand on those ideas with his inquiries. Even though they're much shorter, they're more dense, I'd say, at least based on what I read in this one. But I'm not a huge fan of Hume's philosophy. I don't think it's that good. I don't know how to say. People still study him, so I guess obviously it's good. It's influential. But he's an empiricist, and which I think is just kind of silly from a philosophical perspective, being an empiricist. Because he believed, you can't know anything until it's already happened. I could just drop this book, and the laws of gravity may cease to exist, and it'll just float off into space. I don't know that until I drop it. And look, that time gravity still worked. All right. So he doesn't really believe in cause and effect. He just believes you can observe something and say that it happened, which I think is dumb. it does kind of set a background for other thinkers. Kant especially was very influenced by Hume, mainly in trying to combat Hume's ideas. But that's that. I don't even know where to put these. I'm surrounded by stacks of books. Right there, by my feet. And then next, this one's, I have to be careful with this one. It's kind of shiny. Just, you can see my microphone. All right, that's safe. But you can see it's kind of old and crusty. This is Oswald Spengler's Hour of Decision. It's the first edition 1934 copy. And I read Spengler's other works, other major works at least. His Decline of the West, Man and Technics, and Prussianism and Socialism, also a couple years ago. And then I decided to pick up The Hour of Decision and read that. And I thought, this one, I liked this one the best, I'd say, if I had to rank them. It's just very simple, straightforward. There's some interesting criticisms of the contemporary German ideologies, I guess you could say. The nationalist ideologies at the time, like Nazism and some of the others, because this was written in 1934. And I've heard that this was banned in Nazi Germany. I don't see why it would be, but that's what some people claim. I don't know if it's true, because there is some criticism, but it's not scathing. It's not anything crazy. Basically, he believes that the Nazis were idealists, and they weren't really grounded in reality, and they needed to consider foreign perspectives and the actions of foreign nations in response to their own actions when constructing their politics, which I'd say was a pretty accurate assessment. He also predicts the Second World War, which in his Decline of the West, he predicts the First World War, so I'd say that's pretty fitting. Spengler, never wrong, always right. Yeah, it's hard to really criticize him when he's just been right about everything. I know some people don't like the ideas that he puts out, but, you know, when you're right, you're right. So I definitely recommend this. Only after you've read his other work, of course. But if you can find a copy, I recommend picking it up. Try not to dox myself. And then this one I showed on my banned book stream. I finally got around to reading it. This one's also a little shiny. Camp of the Saints. Because these have like the plastic dust jacket protectors on them. As you can see. And this is also a... Come on. No, you don't want to focus? Camera? Come on, camera. Oh, there we go. All right, so yeah, this is also a first edition copy, very expensive. Another group has gotten the rights to the Camp of the Saints, and they are going to publish it in English again, I believe, in 2025, so this year. They plan to release it, so you no longer have to pay hundreds or even thousands of dollars on eBay for a copy of this book. But I'd say, as far as the story itself goes, I'd say it's fairly unimpressive. I know there are people who would not like to hear that, but yes, he was right about immigration and the response to it and all this stuff, but a lot of the scenes are kind of sexually explicit, and it's just kind of like, was this the author's barely disguised fetish? it does seem that way in a few of them. And all in all, I'd say it was entertaining, but also unimpressive for how people talk about it. They talk about it like it's this earth-shattering book that everyone just has to read. But I don't know. It didn't strike me as anything earth-shattering, I guess. Hello, Hernan. And next. So just pretend there's a copy of the Iliad right here. Everyone says they read the Odyssey in high school. I thought I read the Odyssey in high school until I actually read the Odyssey. And I read the Iliad first, but that's not here because a girl I work with borrowed it and then had a baby and hasn't been back to work. So it's not here, but just pretend the Iliad's here. And I really enjoyed the Iliad, and then I enjoyed the Odyssey a lot more. So I'd say very good. And this is the prose translation. I know some purists might say, oh my God, why? Why would you get the prose translation of Homer? Well, I'm just a normal guy, and I don't think I am cultured enough to sit here and talk about how great Homer's hexameter is. So I just got the prose translation, and it's good enough, I'd say. And I do wish that I had the Iliad here, because there's just one passage that kind of demonstrates how interesting he can make it as a prose translation. And it's right at the beginning of the book, so you can probably find this. I believe that these translations are in the public domain. It's Samuel Butler, I think. Yeah, Samuel Butler. And you can probably just find it online and read it. But my intention at the beginning of the year was to go through a bunch of Greek stuff, Greek philosophy, Greek history, and other works like this. But I didn't really do that. I was like, yeah, I'm going to read a bunch of Plato. I'm going to read a bunch of Aristotle. I'll go through all these tragedies and comedies. I'm going to do all this. It's going to be the Greek year. And then I didn't read any Plato or Aristotle. I did read some comedies and tragedies, though. We'll talk about those later. And I read, of course, the epic Homer's Odyssey and the Iliad. And yeah, like I said, I thought I read this in high school, and then I read it, and I was like, man, we didn't read any of this shit in high school. Most of the school curriculum just covered the actual Odyssey itself, which is only 3 or 4 chapters in the actual book out of 24 chapters. So a lot of it is the political goings-on with Telemachus and Penelope and Odysseus making his final voyage from what's-her-face? Oh man, I already forgot. Calypso. Calypso's island and his adventure home from there. And then he just, real quick, covers all the other stuff that you always hear about with, the Cyclops and all that stuff. So there's really a lot more to it, and I think that stuff was a lot more interesting than what we talked about in high school. Because it really, it builds up a lot of tension. You know what's going to happen. You know Odysseus is going to come home. He's going to see all the suitors. He's going to disguise himself as a hobo. He's going to kill all of them. And it's going to be awesome. But there's just all this tension building up throughout the whole book. And then it finally happens. And it's like, oh man, it's so cool. And same sort of thing with the Iliad. Like, Achilles is going to take the field. He's going to fuck shit up. He's going to kill Hector. But then it doesn't happen until way late in the book. And I thought Achilles was going to die. I thought, there's the Achilles heel, that classic story that's not in the Iliad and it's not in the Odyssey. So that came up a little bit later, and it's not part of the canon, as it were. So that was interesting for sure to see how things played out versus how I thought they would play out based on what I learned in school. Which is why it's important to read things yourself and just see what's actually there. I know I read something else before this. I'll get to it later. All right, so I have Jean-Jacques Rousseau, his first and second discourses. This is where his first discourse is where he kind of comes up with this noble savage myth. He believes that mankind and nature, it was like the Garden of Eden. I don't think he believed in the Garden of Eden, but that's what he believes it was like. Just man was just at peace with no other man other than himself. And then two people found each other and interacted, and then things became more violent and just went down from there. And as man becomes more civilized, he becomes more unnatural and more savage and cruel. A lot of Rousseau's ideas were expressed in the French Revolution, which was a catastrophe, and a lot of his ideas stick around today, and they still cause the same problems as they did back then. If we could go back in time and hang him and burn all his books, I think the world would be a lot better place, but here we are. And I don't even remember what the second discourse was on. Oh, the origin and foundation of inequality. I took some notes on this. As usual, I didn't make any notes for this stream, so I don't really remember what he said about inequality in the second discourse. But I am not really a Rousseau fan, and I'll talk about that more later, because there's another book I read by him. And I'll get to it at some point. It's somewhere in the stack. I read it before I read the discourses, but I'm not sure why it ended up in a different order, because I usually, when I finish reading it, I just throw it into the stack, into the done pile. And a little bit related to that, I have Edmund Burke's Reflections on the Revolution in France. So Rousseau's ideas created the revolution, and Edmund Burke kind of reflects on that and critiques it, because the revolution, it wasn't really about the rights of man or any of that nonsense. It was about I guess the spiteful mutant phenomenon, you could call it. People still try to take victory laps on the revolution. In the Olympics, the most recent Olympics, they had this what the fuck is her name? Why did I forget? It was right there. From the Rose of Versailles. Come on, Marie Antoinette. That's it. Marie Antoinette, decapitated on the Olympics, and it's like, ooh. And they're singing like a French Revolution song. But then the period after that, the period where they established these so-called rights of man, was called the Reign of Terror, and they were just killing people left and right. And then the French people were more than willing to welcome Napoleon with open arms just 10 years later. So much for your great revolution. Edmund Burke is often considered one of the founders of conservatism, and I think it's kind of ironic. He supported the American Revolution, and he supported, I forget the year, and I forget the name of the document that was drafted up, but a previous revolution in England. But he did not support the French Revolution, and he was kind of this conservative Whig guy, politician, and he, what was that? I don't know. He just kind of believed in individual liberty and all these things, but then he didn't like seeing where his beliefs led to ultimately, which is, like I said, it's ironic, because he didn't want to see the end result of his Whig ideology. But this is a pretty insightful book on the revolution and just on conservatism as an ideology in general. A lot of people still talk about this. They still talk about Edmund Burke and cite him pretty extensively. So it's not too long. It took me a while to read through it though, because it's rather dense. Oh, I forgot to mention something about David Hume and how he was a same friend. Speaking of, I just thought of Elon Musk, and then I thought, oh, I should have mentioned that. Speaking of same friends, but he wrote, it's all the way down there. I can't show you, but he wrote like a review for his Treatise of Human Nature, and it was published anonymously, where he reviewed his own book and talked about how great it was. It's just a silly little fact, and that review is in that copy of the Inquiry into Human Understanding that I just showed you. But next I have Leon Degrelle's The Burning Souls. He was let's see, he was in the SS. I don't know if it has his rank here. But he was a decorated soldier in World War II. Later went into exile, and this is published by Antelope Hill, and they have another book published called Leon Degrelle in Exile, which talks about, as you may imagine, his time in exile. But this is kind of his own memoirs, and as it says, a poetic memoir. And I'd say it's pretty good if you're looking for kind of military campaigns and that kind of stuff. You're not going to get it here, but you do get kind of an insight into the psychology of an SS officer on the front during the war, and it is very poetic. It's a beautifully written book, and it's pretty short. A lot of the books I read this year were pretty short, 109 pages, not counting any introduction, but I'd say it's a good book. Next, I have continuing the Homeric tradition, the Aeneid. So Virgil was a Roman, and you can see this was $1. Don't let anyone tell you can't get something good for $1. Although, if I ranked it with the Iliad and the Odyssey, it would be in last place. But it was pretty good. And again, prose translation. It was originally written in classical Latin. I don't speak Latin. I don't read Latin. Any translation is obviously going to lose a lot of what was done there in the verse, in the poetry. So I don't have any problems with reading a prose translation. And it's about Aeneas, who was kind of a giant pussy in the Iliad, not gonna lie. But after running from battle constantly in the Iliad, he later founded Rome and took over the land and found honor in battle and whatnot. So this is about his journey, his own odyssey, if you will, until he arrives in his new homeland and becomes the father of Rome. that's all I really have to say about that. Some Homeric fan fiction, but it's a classic, you know, you gotta read it. And I have a book by Alain de Benoit on Ernst Jünger, who is the author of the famous Storm of Steel, Between the Gods and Titans. And this is a collection of essays by Alain de Benoit, who's kind of a European right-wing thinker, I guess you could call him. Although I'd use that term loosely based on the other works of his that I've read. But this is just some essays on Ernst Jünger, his philosophy. A lot of it focuses on his book, The Worker, which I haven't read, but I'm interested in reading because I've read this. It talks about Jünger's relationship with Heidegger and Nietzsche, and just how he applies to today, how his philosophies apply to today. And also a little bit about his personal life, you know. He comes up with these sort of archetypes, you know, they're like the worker. And there's, soldier, worker, rebel, anarch. But they all kind of represent himself at different stages of his life, I think. He was always kind of a contrarian. He never really had a political ideology. Anytime he could have had one, he turned everyone else down and said, I'm just going to do my own thing. And then when it didn't work out, he was like, see, I knew it. I was right all along. Because he was very influential on the Nazis. They considered him a war hero for his service during World War I. He wrote his Storm of Steel, very popular, very famous, probably the most famous World War I memoir for the German side. And he was never really into the Nazis. He criticized them pretty heavily. He associated a lot with National Bolsheviks, which might sound like an oxymoron, but they were people who believed that you could have Bolshevik ideas and nationalist ideas, even though I'd say Bolshevism was inherently internationalist. But he later said he believed that Germany would be better off if the National Bolshevist leader had taken over. Probably, I mean, I guess that's debatable. You could probably say the war never would have happened, but I also think that Germany would have been crushed under the treaties also. So, who knows? But later in life, Jünger was just a drug addict, and he was just doing LSD with a bunch of his fellow intellectuals, and he lived to be pretty old. He lived to be like 102 or 103, so I guess doing all that LSD paid off. But I think a lot of his stuff gets a lot weaker and a lot weirder later in life. But it's still an interesting book about what he thought. I also read 2 ebooks by Alain de Benoit. I read his Manifesto for a European Renaissance and Beyond Human Rights, and I'd say they were altogether unimpressive and not really worth reading. But that's my thoughts there. Physiognomy wins again in that case. I didn't read that this year. Either. I bought a couple collector's editions of books that I already read, and I just threw them in the pile. Oh yeah, I have Graduate School with Heidegger. I read this when I was in Aruba. I was just sitting on the beach reading Graduate School with Heidegger. And it's it never got wet or anything, but it did get pretty worn. It's kind of like bent and kind of weird now. But this book it's a good book. It's a good introduction to Heidegger, I'd say. It's by Greg Johnson, who is a PhD in philosophy. I wouldn't say he's a Heidegger scholar, but he is familiar with Heidegger. He's, I'd say, very familiar. And most of these, it's published by Countercurrents, and most, or maybe all, of these articles are up on Countercurrents. So you could technically read this book for free, but I always like to support the authors. And since these are all separate articles, there's a lot of repetition, which I would say is a good thing. Heidegger uses a lot of specialized terminology, uses a lot of alien concepts if you're encountering him for the first time. So it's good to, you read one and then you read another and it's like, by the way, Dasein means this. The clearing is this. All these different ideas that Heidegger has, it gets kind of reiterated in each article and it just kind of builds on itself as you go along. So I'd say that kind of repetition is a good thing here. And I'd also say this last chapter, Graduate School with Heidegger, and recommended reading are very useful because he has other books that he recommends that kind of boil it down. He gives you, a recommended order for reading Heidegger himself, and also these companion works and works about Heidegger's life, and these kind of more specialized books. It was a very, very good read. I definitely like this book a lot, and if you see it somewhere, which I think is pretty unlikely, you're probably not going to see it anywhere other than Countercurrents websites. It might be on Amazon. Some of their books end up on Amazon, some of the less controversial ones, but it is what it is. And if you can get a copy of this and you're interested in Heidegger, I definitely recommend picking it up as your introduction. And then, of course, we finished the Federalist Papers this year. I don't really have anything else to say. We read this on stream, and they're interesting. It was also $1. Right here, I have Dead Souls by Gogol, and this was recommended to me by a friend, and this friend has been recommending me all these different Russian literature, and you'll see that as we move along. So this was kind of the first one of her recommendations that I picked up, and she said she didn't like this book, but I enjoyed it quite a bit. It's very funny, which you wouldn't really think of if you're thinking of Russian literature, but just kind of the way it's about this guy named Chichikov, who is a member of the lesser nobility, and he is out there trying to curry favor with other members of the lesser nobility, and he wants to ultimately buy dead serfs, so dead souls, from them. And at the time in Russia, they had serfdom, which was essentially slavery, and if there was a census every 10 years or so, and if your serfs died between the census period, then you would still get taxed for those serfs until the next census. So he was trying to say, okay, how about I make you a deal, I'll buy your dead serfs off of you. So for like half of the book, or more than half maybe, you're kind of wondering at his motives, and it gets a little less interesting once you know what his actual motive is, of course, but gives you a lot of speculation, generates a lot of interest in saying, why could he be doing this? Why could he be trying to amass all of these dead souls for himself? But a lot of the interactions of him with the nobility are entertaining. Like there's one scene where they're both trying to usher each other into the house. He's visiting a friend, and the friend is like, you first, and he's like, oh no, it's your house, you first. And then they both try to squeeze in at the same time. And it's just kind of silly stuff like that. And he's kind of like a silver-tongued Mephistopheles character almost, except when he's talking to women. When he's talking to women, he doesn't know how to deal with women. So both in business and in romance, he just becomes kind of a bit of a dandy, and he just doesn't understand how to talk to women or how women think. And altogether, I'd say it's pretty entertaining. And this is the critical edition, so it also, if you find this copy, there are maybe 10 or so essays critiquing and talking about the book. So it was unfinished. The second volume he burned, and a few fragments remained. So those are, in this edition at least, those are here. But yeah, it's unfinished. So you're gonna read this, you get to the end, and then it just breaks off like mid-sentence. Right there. See? That's it. That's the end of the book. So it's a bit of a shame that he burned the second volume of this. But it is good that it's preserved in some form at least. And the Reeve translation. So these people are usually the recommended translations for his works that I've noticed when I check online. The Pevere and Volokhonsky. But when you're at the used bookstore, you get what you get. So still readable, still funny, still entertaining. I saw no problems with this as I was reading it, so I'm assuming the translation is at least serviceable, and I enjoyed it for sure. And the next, I have The Enemy of Europe by Francis Parker Yockey. This was also put out by Countercurrents this year, or maybe the year before. And this book has an interesting story about it. So the book itself, it's, it kind of sums up a lot of his ideas. He believed the enemy of Europe was not the Soviet Union, but America. And he talks about that in here. He talks about his ideas for the Red-Brown Alliance. He believed that the German nationalists should unite with the communists to fight the Western plutocratic systems and save Europe. But we couldn't save Europe. America's too strong. USA. But this book has an interesting backstory. Yockey was a dissident in Eastern Germany. I believe it was Eastern Germany. And he was arrested and committed suicide in prison. And all of his books they hunted down his books, they burned them, they destroyed the printing materials. This was published in both English and German. And I want to say he was American. Yockey himself, American. So he was American. So his original language was English. He spoke some German. Well, enough German to write a book at least, and lived in Germany at the time. And after his suicide, they tried to wipe out his books. The English version of this is totally gone. Nobody has discovered a copy of it, but there were some German editions still floating around, and the people at Countercurrents decided they wanted to reverse engineer an English translation of this book. And they studied his other works and used his linguistic habits, his writing habits, and kind of phrases that he would use in the German translation, and worked those two things together to try and get an English edition that would be as close as possible to how he would have written this. And there are some troubles they had to go through. They had, he wasn't a native German speaker, so there were mistakes in the German that they had to try to say, okay, maybe this is what he actually means, or try and figure these things out. And so we get this English edition of this book finally for the first time. And of course, I bought the special edition. I won't dox myself by telling you what number it is, but it's a low number. Because I was pretty excited about this. And they also, it's fairly short. It's a little over 100 pages. So the rest of this is the actual German edition. If you read German or want to compare the German edition with the English reverse translation, I don't even know what you would call it. You can do that, whatever. Yeah, and they have their little translation notes here. But it's definitely a great task that they undertook to resurrect this book and preserve his ideas. A lot of people won't like his ideas. I see him get called a Nazi a lot. I don't think he was a Nazi. In The Enemy of Europe, he says that race doesn't exist. He believes it's a social construct, which I'd say puts him pretty far outside Nazism, at least. Although he was still a nationalist, maybe more of a pan-European nationalist, but I'd hardly call him a Nazi if he's saying that race doesn't exist. But if you are interested in something like that, I'd say that the book itself is it's so-so. Interesting if you're interested in his ideas. If you're interested in kind of the post-Oswald Spengler, Spenglerian thinkers, then I definitely recommend picking up his works. But if you're also interested in just seeing something that almost was completely destroyed and wiped off the face of the earth, I think it's definitely a good contender. Which, I mean, if you know my reading habits, or if you've been able to tell already, that's the kind of thing I like. I like seeing different ideas. I like seeing something that was almost destroyed, or something that's taboo, because it makes. I don't think Yaki's ideas were going to start a revolution in Europe. I don't think they are offensive or I don't want to say profound, but I don't think they were offensive or radical. Maybe a little radical, but it's not really something worth banning on its own. But I think it was a bit of a threat to East Germany, at least. The East German political ideas, the Red-Brown Alliance and all that kind of thing. So I know why it was destroyed, but I don't think it's anything too objectionable if you're worried about being offended or whatever. And next I have 3 biographies of Horst Wessel. This, as the title would suggest, it contains 3 biographies of Horst Wessel, and all three were written as propaganda by the Nazi Party. But it does tell the story of a real person. He was a real man. The famous Horst Wessel Lied, the song by that the Nazis always sang, was written by him. He was a up-and-coming member of the party. He was the second most requested speaker after Joseph Goebbels himself. And these three biographies are pretty different, but they have a lot of similarities, and you can kind of piece together the truth, or try to at least, and see kind of what his life was really like. And, you know, I don't read boring books, so like I've said for everything, it's pretty interesting. I definitely think that they were good reads. They were entertaining. They worked as propaganda, I would say. You know, you get a lot of that national feeling when you're reading it. A lot, you can sense the pride and the sense of honor that he had in his duties. And he knew he was doing a dangerous job. They all knew that. He was in Berlin, which was, you know, the hotbed of communism in Germany at the time, and he was a Nazi. So he was eventually shot and killed by a communist, and I think it was like 3 communists were later they were arrested at first. They got a pretty light sentence, because obviously Weimar Germany was going to be lenient with someone like that. But the Nazi Party later hung them, whatever. So they got theirs eventually. But he was shot. He spent, I want to say, over 20 days in the hospital. Struggling to survive, and then eventually passed away. And that was a like all these kinds of books, it's insightful to see something from the other side, or from this period in history where people don't really want to talk positively about it or say even just the facts. So this wasn't necessarily just saying the facts. Like I said, it's propaganda. But you can kind of get a picture of his life by looking at all 3 of these and comparing everything. Next, I read a lot of Antelope Hill books this year, it seems. The Story of the Russian Land. It's a overview of Russian history from antiquity, so basically from myth, to the year 1054 with the death of Yaroslav the Wise. And that's all covered in this book. This is the first volume of his history. There are 4 volumes. This guy wrote this comprehensive history of Russia, I guess you could say. And Tsar Nicholas II was a big fan. He made it part of the curriculum. And so far they've only translated Volume 1. And last I heard, there isn't really much interest in translating Volume 2, which is pretty sad, because I really enjoyed this. It's written more of like a narrative. Like if you've read Herodotus, his history, you know he constructs this narrative. He gives, all these different ideas. And, it's not just boring, on this day this happened, on this day so-and-so did this, and there was a battle, and there were 300 people on one side and 250 on the other. It's nothing like that. He really constructs the narrative and has like a continuous story going on throughout the book. And it is history. It's not fiction. It's not like a story, but he constructs a story of his people. Basically, I think he originates it in the Trojan War. You know, because who doesn't have a Trojan War myth or origin myth? Let's see. He believed that Achilles was a Scythian warrior, and I'm like, I don't know. But he believed Achilles was a Scythian warrior, and he talks about the Scythian cultures and the burial mounds and all these different things. And then he goes into the formations of Kiev and all that kind of stuff, and the introduction of Christianity. Saint Olga has a chapter, which I'm a big Saint Olga fan. Saint Vladimir has a pretty long section about his life. He was the one who baptized the Russians first, or at least as a nation, anyway. Yeah, you learn a lot. Russia is kind of, people don't really talk about it. It's kind of an alien place compared to our Western history and the rest of Europe. So it's definitely a lot of fresh, new information in this book if you're not already like big into Russian history, or even if you are. I definitely recommend it, and I think Antelope Hill should get to work on Volume 2. All right, Antelope Hill, if you're watching this, Volume 2, when? Oh, I have to stretch. I'm on my second stack of books now. I'll try to move this closer. So next I have the history of Diodorus. He wrote basically a history of the world up until his life, but a lot of his books, I think he was from the 1st or 2nd century AD. A lot of these were lost to history, so a lot of them exist only in fragments. It would be nice if, we found some more of his work, but he basically took a lot of the old historians and compiled their works into one big history of everything. So this first volume covers books 1 through 14, as it says, and then I have the second volume somewhere over there. I haven't read it yet, but that has the rest of what exists, and this is, as you can see, fairly thick. The words are tiny. It took me quite a while to read through this, and that's why I've been putting off Volume 2. Usually I take care of my things, my spines don't really get damaged on the books I read, but this one, I don't know if you can see it, but you can see there's a crease along the spine. Just because it's so fat, you can't really read a paperback that's this big without some kind of damage to it. Anytime someone posts a bookshelf, you always get these retards in the comments that are like, where are the cracked spines? You take care of your shit, Some people like to have their things look nice, so they don't crack the spines. But now, with this one, they'll know. I read it. It was in perfect condition when I bought it, and now it's all fucked up. The book itself, like I said, he compiled a lot of things from different historians, and you just kind of get, history. It's pretty dry, pretty, I'd say, I don't want to say boring, but I'll say it's dry. It's kind of a slog, kind of a struggle to get through. But ultimately, I think studying and reading through things like this is worth it. This one ends with let's see. Oh yeah, Dionysius the First was still the tyrant of Syracuse. So that's kind of where the story ends for that volume. And the second volume picks up from there. It talks about Philip and Alexander the Great and all that stuff. With a Kindle, you don't need to crack spines. Well, Kindle isn't really reading. It's an ebook. It's not real. It's fake. I just like physical books. I don't know. So this is what I was looking for earlier. I actually read this before I read the first and second discourses. But some more Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Again, not a fan. Anytime I see someone talk about violating the social contract, I just cringe a little bit inside. You see it on both the left and the right. It's not really a political thing, I guess. But I just, I don't know. It's just forget this guy existed, please. And thus he talks about the social contract, the idea of the general will, that the people in a nation have a will, and it should be obeyed. And if it isn't obeyed, it should be obeyed by force. And I took a lot of notes on this when I read it, but I didn't look at them before the stream, so it's all just kind of it's all just left my brain at this point. But it's about government and society and politics, and it's a good guide on how to have all the wrong ideas. All right, next in my Russian literature journeys, Mikhail Lermontov, a hero of our time. I'd say out of all of the fiction I've read this year, this was one of the most enjoyable. It just starts off strong and it stays strong all the way to the end, all the way. Well, it's not really in any order, I think, officially. So this is just the order that the translator put it in, I believe. But I think ending with the Fatalist was probably a great choice if it was the editor's choice. But I think so it takes place during the Caucasian War, the war between Russia and the Caucasus tribes. And it's about a soldier, and it's called A Hero of Our Time, but it might be a little sarcastic, a little tongue-in-cheek or ironic, because he's not a hero in the sense that you would think, but he is just a guy just doing his thing, and he's kind of a lady killer, if you will. I definitely recommend this if you can find it, which you probably can. I mean, this one's Penguin Classics. They put it out. A lot of people are still talking about this. It's pretty short. I think I read it in like 2 days. But yeah, I just picked it up and I was reading, and I really just couldn't stop until I was done. It was one of those. So I liked this one a lot. And I actually as you'll see later, I picked up a history book about that time period just to understand it a little bit better. Because the Caucasian War isn't really something we talk about. I'm American, so that's like way distant in time and place from anything that we would learn normally. I didn't read this year either. It's another collector's edition of a book that I already own. I got some more Oswald Spengler, Pessimism, Political Essays. This was just put out in English this year. Put out by Imperium Press, I believe it is. Their, I'd say, quality is a little hit or miss. But they put out some of these other books. I read one of these. Or maybe it's not part of this studies and reaction series, but I read their edition of Friedrich List's a national, I don't remember the full title, National System of Political Economy, I believe. So he was an economist, and the introduction was just kind of like, there was an old introduction, which I'm not talking about this book anymore, I'm talking about another book, but there was another introduction in English for that was just a lot of kind of whining about how free markets are totally great and Friedrich List was wrong. But so they wrote a new introduction, but I thought it was kind of amateurish. A lot of their citations are like blogs and stuff like that, like websites, and I don't like it when people do that. When you're citing a blog or a website, just don't. or if your citation is like a person's username, there's some of that in there. And I know these people have followings, and someone might know who this username is, but I didn't, and I was just like, who cares? But that was that book. So this book is a collection of essays by Oswald Spengler. When I first opened it, I was like, what the fuck? Because, look, there's like no margin space here. It's just like a wall of text. It doesn't look good, but this is tiny. So, I mean, I have pretty small hands, and this book fits in your pocket. You can, I mean, it's like the size of a cell phone, pretty much. You know, I put it in my pocket. I went to the mechanic. I had work done on my car, and I just pulled out my pocket Oswald Spengler and started reading. So it was, it's pretty nice, pretty convenient. So when I first saw it, I was like, that's ugly. But then, you know, if they expanded these margins or anything, it wouldn't be the same size. It wouldn't be able to fit in your pocket like that. So you lose some of that convenience factor. As for the essays themselves, you're not really going to get anything new here if you're already familiar with Spengler's work. If you don't have time to read Decline of the West, you can pick this up along with his other shorter works like Man and Technics, Impressionism and Socialism, and try to get a picture of his ideas. So there's an interesting essay on Nietzsche in here, and Nietzsche and his century. And then there's another interesting one, which I actually read before this. I read it just on some website somewhere. It's like the shortest essay in this book, called Is World Peace Possible? You always see people talk about it. People are anti-war. People are pacifists. They say we need to avoid war at all costs. And Spengler just kind of addresses that here. And this was in 1936. As you can see, very short. But I'd say it's probably, out of all these things, the most relevant to today, at least. So I'd recommend just going online and just reading this. And you can find it somewhere, anywhere on the internet. And basically the idea is, no, it's not possible. Because, peace is an ideal and war is a matter of fact. And that's basically the idea that he has there. And that one's on Amazon, actually, so you can, if you want your pocket Oswald Spengler, you can just go on Amazon and buy it. And this, some more Nikolai Gogol, Mirgorod. This is for, I don't know how you would say that, Mirgorod. Hang on. This has a title page. I always do that. Because when it's right side up, and you look at it from the side, his name is upside down. I don't know why it's like that. But this has like a dual language title page, I believe. Yeah. It's pretty cool. I'm a big fan of dual language stuff. So the actual, So someone cut off the dust jacket and just left it in there. So I kept it. But yeah, as you can see, it's not a dual language edition, just the title page. But this is one of his original collections, I guess you would say. So I said earlier when I was showing my other thing, when it's translated into English, a lot of times people will put like a collected works and they put stuff all out of order, they separate things. So this is one of the actual collections that he released and just a translation of what was in that collection of short stories. So it's pretty good. Taras Bulba, I really enjoyed. It's kind of a very pro, like Russian nationalist almost, like pan-Slavic nationalism. As like a military hero story. And the others are all pretty entertaining as well. So you can actually find this one pretty easily. This collection is I've seen it on Abe Books for like $10, so I highly recommend that. They're all entertaining. All the stories in here. There's not a single bad or mediocre one. And next, I have Sophocles, the four tragedies that aren't Oedipus. So I made a tweet about this when I finished. I ranked them all. I think I put Ajax up front. Ajax was kind of a story about the old making way for the new. It was about the death of Ajax, the hero from the Iliad. Ajax of Telamon. There were two Ajaxes, but it was Ajax of Telamon, or son of Telamon, or whatever. And so yeah, he dies, and it's kind of, like I said, the old making way for the new. The old barbaric Greece dies, and you're left with the intellectual, reasoning, thinking men of Athens who are civilized, and they love democracy and whatever. And then you have women of Trachis or Trachis. I don't really know, but that's about Hercules, the death of Hercules. Electra is about after the Trojan War, Agamemnon comes home. He is murdered by his wife and her new lover. And then Electra and Orestes, the children of Agamemnon, take their revenge. So this is from Electra's perspective on that revenge story. And then you have Philoctetes, which is about the son of Achilles. Yeah. Yeah, the son of Achilles, trying to convince Philoctetes, this hero, to come and fight in the Trojan War for them. And he has like a gimp foot, and he was abandoned. He was exiled on this island on the way to Troy. But now, like 9 years into the Trojan War, they're like, hey man, can you come help us out? So it's this back and forth trying to convince Philoctetes to come and fight for them. But these were all... I haven't read the Oedipus trilogy, I guess, but this was my first experience with Sophocles, and I believe that it is just these and the three the Theban plays, they're called, the ones about Oedipus. I believe those are the only surviving works of Sophocles, so this is a pretty good collection. It has a good introduction. They talk about the stage direction a lot, because they don't know how it really was, but they try to give you a look on how this was actually performed, because these were plays. And the plays back then only had 3 actors, like 3 speaking actors, so they had to divide all these roles up between the 3 people. So you have one person come and he might play Orestes, and then he might come later and play Athena. And they kind of give you this insight into how the stage direction may have been during these plays, which I think helps put it in a lot of perspective, both historically and just trying to envision it. Because when I read these, I didn't really read them as a story. I read them as if I was watching a play. And this edition, at least, helped a lot with that. And this next one, there's no need to really talk much about. Hitler's Wonderland. We read it on stream, and that gave us a good perspective into Nazi Germany after it first formed, and the changes that were made between then and the end of the Weimar era. This book is pretty rare. It's pretty expensive if you can find it. So the videos don't have that many views, but I'm glad I've at least done something to try and preserve this book and make it available to just anyone. So it's not quite in the public domain yet. I could get bonked by YouTube for it, maybe. But come on, camera. Oh, you're almost there. All right. Well, maybe if I just take everything away. No. Oh, there we go. Okay. So, yeah, we read that on stream, and I was happy to read it. I've looked for like 2 years on all these different booksellers, all these different bookstores, trying to find it. I spent a lot of money on it, but I was pretty happy. Next, I read Plutarch's Age of Alexander. So I was expecting this to just cover Alexander the Great. Oh, is there still a receipt in here? There is. Look at that. Free bookmark. I should hide that. it's just for the bookstore, but it has some digits from my credit card and stuff. So this is, Plutarch wrote these biographies that are just called the lives, and this has 9. It's like a cat, and has 9 lives, and they're all, as the title of the book would suggest, they're all around the age of Alexander the Great. One is about Alexander the Great, and it just kind of sets up the period before him, during, and right after. Covers people. I'll just say who's here, even though I always fuck up the names. I don't know. You can just read that. He has Demosthenes, who is a famous orator, and then Alexander himself, Pyrrhus. If you ever heard the term Pyrrhic victory or Pyrrhic victory, that's who that is named after. And these are just short biographies of each of these people. I read Arrian's The Campaigns of Alexander the Great a couple years ago, and this kind of builds up on that world. And when I get to volume 2 of Diodorus, this will also come in handy, because it'll be, when someone's writing a history that spans hundreds of years in all these different places all over the world, you get all these different names and all these different cities, and it all just gets muddled together, and it's hard to really follow a lot of it. So I think this will be like a good primer for reading the next volume of Diodorus, which is why I read it. Alfred Baumer, Nietzsche, philosopher and politician. So this guy was kind of the biggest Nietzsche scholar in the Third Reich. And after the war, he never really got his teaching position back. His works were just kind of thrown to the wayside because, he was a big bad Nazi. He wasn't executed or anything, but he just kind of faded into obscurity until he died. And this is the first time any of his work has been translated into English. This just came out maybe 6 months ago. I don't know if they... Look at that. Another receipt. I'm just getting free bookmarks everywhere. Well, it doesn't say what month, but copyright 2024. So I saw that it was released, and it was a day one buy for me. I was like, I had been looking for his work before, and then I saw that none of it was ever translated into English, and it was really, really disappointing. But now you can read it. And, obviously he talks about Nietzsche. He talks about Nietzsche's philosophy, and then the political ideas that come out of that philosophy. And of course he was a Nazi, so he talks about how Nazism was the true incarnation of Nietzsche's ideas. Because everyone wants to lend their political ideology some legitimacy by tying it to these past intellectuals. And Nietzsche, he was a big deal. He was a big deal. He was, I don't know, what was it they say? He was either the last metaphysicist or the first postmodernist or something like that. But he was very influential at the time. Still very influential, obviously. And it's good to see what they wrote about him, what an intellectual wrote about him, at least in the Third Reich. It's, again, not a perspective you're going to see very often. Next I have The Tyranny of Human Rights by Carrie Bolton. This one So I had mentioned I read Alain de Benoit's Beyond Human Rights, and that was kind of a lot of. Alain de Benoit is called like a new right person, political thinker, but he just seems to be. He seems like he wants your cookie cutter liberal democracy, but just a little less gay. That's how he seems to talk about it. So I thought Kerry Bolton put the ideas in a much more palatable manner in this book, The Tyranny of Human Rights. Whereas Alain de Benoit said that human rights was the mean Westerners colonizing the rest of the world with their ideas. Bolton kind of takes it in as a little more how do I want to phrase this? A little smarter, a little less whiny. He talks about how human rights is used to stifle free speech, to further the interests of the dominating ideology of the day, and to enrich our allies and punish our enemies. Because you hear about human rights all the time, but if you look at it, it doesn't really mean anything. We don't actually care about human rights. I mean, you might care about it as a person, but as a nation, as a society, as Western civilization, we don't really give a shit. You can look at, Israel blowing up a hospital and say, wow, that's fucked up, but nobody's going to do anything about it because, it's not in our interest to. Meanwhile, you'll have someone like Assad over in Syria. It's like, oh, that's human rights. We gotta get that. So, it's just one of these. It's a tool that's used. That's not really treated as a universal idea, even though we try to paint it as one. Because the idea of human rights don't exist. You're given whatever rights that you're given by the people who rule over you. And that's just a fact. We all lived through COVID. I don't think anyone under 5 years old is watching my stream. So we all lived through COVID. We all know that whatever rights you think you have can be gone tomorrow. And that's just how it is. And in this book, he talks about that. He talks about the development of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that the UN puts out. So the UN has this document that gives us our human rights, and I guess it was developed by like 19 different countries or something, and they were all trying to come up with their idea of what they believed human rights were. These inalienable natural human rights that everyone has. They just couldn't figure it out. They couldn't come to an agreement, and eventually the UN just said, fuck it. We'll just go with what you have, and we'll just publish it. So they never really came to a consensus. They just said, all right, here it is. Because different groups of people are obviously going to have different ideas on what your rights are, what a society should be like, and there's no universal idea, but we pretend there is so we can further our own interests. And that's what he talks about in this book. So I thought it was pretty interesting, much more better than Alain de Benoit does. And the one critique I would have for this book, it's rather long. It's a little over 400 pages and just kind of drags after a while. Like after the first 100, 150 pages, it's like, okay, I understand what you're saying, and I either agree or I disagree, but the rest of it is just kind of these examples that reinforce his idea. He does talk about the concept of genocide and how that was developed, which is pretty interesting. I didn't really know about Raphael Lemkin or anything like that. I did see a recent debate, actually, where he was name dropped by a so-called genocide expert. He's a historian who specializes in genocides. He's not, maybe calling him a genocide expert is a little misleading, but he name dropped Raphael Lemkin during that debate, and I was like, oh, I know who that is because I read this book. But yeah, it makes a good reference work. You can reference a lot of things in here, a lot of examples. But like I said, it drags a lot, and it took me a while to finish after I started because I was just like, oh my God, man, are you just going on and on about all these different things? But yeah, I mean, it is what it is. It's very comprehensive. He did a lot of research, and it can't be entertaining at all times, but it is a valuable tool. It's a valuable resource. I think I'll probably be cracking this book open fairly often just to refresh on certain things during certain discussions. So, again, another Antelope Hill book. Not sponsored, but I do like the books that they put out. I've shilled them before. Next, I have the, oh my God, come on, camera. I don't know why it does that. Autofocus, but it focuses on the wrong thing. What's it even trying to focus on? It's like way up here. How do you like my nails? Spend more time messing around with this camera than I will talking about the books. Oh no, I rambled about a few of them. Anyway, this is, I don't really know how to pronounce his name. Aeschylus? While my camera's trying to figure stuff out, it's trying to figure its life out, I'll just Google how to pronounce it. Aeschylus. Okay. I was way off. So just like Ajax, I think this does a better job. Ajax has a lot of this duty and honor, and it's very sad. But the message about the old giving way to the new, I think, is done a lot better here in the Orestia. You want to paint my nails? Yeah, go for it. So this is 3 plays: Agamemnon, the Libation Bearers, and Eumenides. And it covers, just like Electra, it covers the story of Orestes and his revenge. So it starts out with Agamemnon. Comes home from the Trojan War. He is welcomed by his wife. His wife has found a new lover, Agamemnon, I believe his cousin. And there's a lot of family history there with Pelops and there's a family tree in here somewhere. I think it might be towards the beginning. Because it's like Pelops was, hang on, duty. Yeah. This is, maybe it's in the back. I know there's a family tree in here. There we go. So Tantalus was favored by the gods. He had a son, Pelops, but Tantalus, stole some ambrosia. He tricked the god, or thought he would trick the gods into serving his son at a banquet to the gods, and so they sent Tantalus to Hades. They resurrected Pelops, and he had two sons, Thyestes and Atreus. Atreus had two sons, Menelaus and Agamemnon. So Agamemnon is who the first play is about. And let's see, Atreus killed all of the children of Thyestes, his brother, except for Aegisthus, who is the lover of Agamemnon's wife. So there's this family feud going on, and you hear the term banquet repeated throughout the story. And it starts out as this sinister thing invoking the idea of Pelops, or the image of Pelops in the cauldron. But then by the end of it, it becomes like, it's a celebration, the banquet. It's a celebratory thing, and you see this a lot. Agamemnon, he's this barbaric warlord. When you read the Iliad, he's this just kind of a brute. He believes that might makes right, and he takes what he pleases because he's the strongest. He's the strongest boy in town, and he can just do what he wants. But then he's killed, and Orestes takes revenge. So that's what happens in the Libation Bearers. He kills Clytemnestra, his mother, and he kills Aegisthus. And then in the Eumenides, Orestes is haunted by the Furies because he's killed his parents, or he killed his mother. So the three Furies are haunting him, and he goes to get purified. And at the end of the story, the Furies become the Eumenides. So they are no longer these tormented souls. They become these, these beautiful spirits and patrons of, whatever culture and shit. And there's a procession through the city of all the women who are empowered, and it's this very, very progressive. It's this very progressive idea that Aeschylus gives us, which makes it a lot more interesting to me because that has modern implications. We see progressives nowadays too, and these are people who believe that history is a straight line, and you had the savage era on one end, and now we're more enlightened and we're better, and you've just gone from one to the next in a straight line. And you see that here 2,500 years ago in the Orestia, where he was, you had Agamemnon who believed that might makes right. He dies. There's this metamorphosis that happens, and Orestes comes out of it. He's purified. They have democracy. They have women's rights. They have intellectuals and enlightened people creating the future instead of these strong warlords who rule by the sword. Now they rule through enlightenment and principles and laws. And so the progressive idea is certainly there, and that's 2,500 years ago. So it's like, okay, well, they thought the same thing back then that we think now. So it's obviously not just the straight line where you can say, okay, we're just better now. It's just different times call for different ideas and different different systems that people have to live under. So Agamemnon was a great leader. He was well loved. He was a hero. But his era was over. And then the era of the Eumenides came forth. At some point, the enlightened Athens ceased to exist. And we were back. They had, the 30 tyrants. I believe shortly after this, I don't remember when exactly this was written, but I believe the 30 tyrants were shortly after this came out. These plays. Yeah, it says 480 BC, when the Persians sacked Athens, he was 45. So, this was after the victory, I believe, that he wrote this, the victory of Athens over the Persians. It was, a new era had dawned with Greece. And, little did he know that shortly after that, they'd have the Peloponnesian War. Athens would lose its democracy to the 30 tyrants, and they'd go back and forth between tyrannies and democracies and oligarchies for several years. And you'd have Socrates come out, but then he was forced to commit suicide. And things just went up and down. There wasn't this straight line of this progressive idea. So there's definitely the story itself is interesting, it's very entertaining, and it also has a lot of modern implications. So I definitely liked this, if you couldn't tell by my rambling. Next, I read the Volga Tatars, A Profile in National Resilience. This covers the history of the, I guess it's pronounced Tatar, people. They're Tatar. I've heard both. Starting from kind of the ancient times, the whole Scythian history again. It goes to the story of Attila the Hun, the Mongols and the Khans, but it mostly focuses on the communist era. So when communism first takes over, what did these people do to kind of preserve their culture, and what was their idea, or what was their thought on communism? So a lot of them helped the communists at first because they believed in they wanted to be independent from Russia. So the communists were like, yeah, sure, you can be independent, you can have your own autonomous republic, and it'll be great. But then the communists kind of stabbed him in the back because it's communism. And they kind of developed their own idea of communism, and it was much different than what the internationalist Bolsheviks believed in. They rejected class struggle. They were nationalist. They wanted to preserve their language and culture. And as I was reading it, I was like, man, it sounds a lot like Nazi Germany. And I wonder what these guys did during World War II. So I was really excited to get to that part of the book. And then the book, mysteriously, just skips World War II. So I looked it up, and it turns out there was an SS division of Tatar people, but I believe it was fairly short-lived. Some of them defected. I think that the poet Musa Jalil was in that division. Tatars, no, not Tatars. But I guess a lot of them ended up not being big fans of the Nazis, and then after that, she doesn't really talk about all that much. She wants to present, this was written at the time that the Soviet Union still existed. So she tries to present both the Soviet Union and the Tatar people in a positive light. So anytime that they would have conflicted really, or that the Soviet Union would have oppressed these people, she just kind of skips over it. So there's a lot of history in like the 19-teens and the 1920s, and then it just kind of skips over a lot of stuff. And then it's like, okay, we're in the 80s now, and things are great, and we look forward to seeing what happens next. So, you know, every historian, you have to take into consideration their own biases, and that's definitely, it definitely comes through in this work. But it is good. I mean, this isn't an ethnic group that you would normally speak about or even learn about in your typical history class. And you're not really going to see a positive view of someone like Attila the Hun in another history typically. So I think it was definitely a worthwhile read, definitely interesting, a fresh new perspective, and a history of a people that is pretty interesting. You know, they have an interesting history. There's a lot of different ethnic groups centered in that one area, and they still don't have independence. They're still part of Russia, and I read about someone recently getting arrested for teaching their language. So there's still problems over there with these people and dealing with living in Russia, I guess. All right, next I have this old crusty book. This is Dio's History of Rome, Volume 1. I read the first volume. So this one has all of the fragments for books 1 through 35 of Dio's History of Rome. He wrote 80, I think it was 80. And yep, these are just fragments from the time of Aeneas to the Second Punic War, I believe, is where it ends off. Perhaps even finishes the Second Punic War. I'm not quite certain. He does, the editor or whatever does lay it out somewhere. As you can see, this is pretty old. So let's see, this finishes on book 35. So the Battle of Pharsalus, dictatorship of Sulla. Oh yeah. So it goes not quite to the end of the Second Punic War, but towards the end, we'll say 78 BC to 70 BC. And again, it's mostly in fragments. I think this is from like 1905. Yeah. So this is a old crusty turd I picked up at the bookstore, and I saw it and I was like, wow, I gotta get that. So it was only $40 for 6 volumes. Definitely a nice thing to pick up to add to the collection for sure. And I plan to read the rest of it next year. And then next, another Antelope Hill book, Whitey on the Moon. So this was a book, or is a book. It's a collection of articles, just like Graduate School with Heidegger. I believe you can probably find all of these. I think these were published on like the UNS Review, one of those kinds of websites. And he talks about as you can see in the subtitle, Race, Politics, and the Death of the U.S. Space Program. So he talks about the social ideas around the time of the Apollo program. A lot of people believed that we were wasting all this money going to space when we could be helping African Americans right here at home. And several $1 trillion later, and a dead space program later, and there's more poverty in the nation than ever, and more single parenthood, and all of the problems that these people complained about back then are even worse now. And we have sacrificed the future of humanity for basically nothing. So he wrote these articles. Again, since they're all separate articles that were published independently originally, there's a lot of repetition, but you get a lot of these same names, same places, same events, and it just kind of helps hammer the idea home that, you know, there were these certain people protesting the space race, protesting the Apollo program. People showed up to the launch. There was a reverend who showed up to the launch of the first Apollo mission that was going to the moon. I believe it was Apollo 11. And he brought this cart driven by a mule, and him and maybe 150 other people showed up to protest. But in the process of protesting, he also asked for VIP seats for the launch, and he got them, because people just don't like to stand up for themselves, and they believe that they have to humor these bad actors who want to destroy the nation, and all this stuff. So he got his VIP seats for free, and protested the moon mission. And he got his trillions of dollars in welfare and nothing to show for it. So I don't think he's still alive, but I kind of wish he was, so we could rub his face in it. But since this was published on the UNS Review, there's a little bit that's lost in some of the social commentary, because the guy who owns the website is Jewish, and so you get this kind of stuff where Paul Kersey, the author, will refer to someone like Randy Newman as a white liberal, and Randy Newman obviously is a Jew, and you just have to roll your eyes and say, okay, well, it's from the UNS Review. I guess they can't really talk about that stuff over there. But it's still just kind of, when you see people talking about white liberals and they just name a bunch of Jews, it's like, okay, I know what you want to say, but you just have to understand that that's where they're coming from. But I didn't know a lot of the stuff that's in this book about the space program and how it ended, and the shift in focus that NASA made from space exploration and our progress in the sciences to diversity. That became the ultimate focus as early as the 70s. So you see that in this book, and even earlier, because there is an astronaut that he talks about, not astronaut, but potential astronaut in this book, that he talks about. The John F. Kennedy really wanted a black man on the moon. So when they were training astronauts, there was a black man among this, the first group that they tested. He scored at the very bottom of the group. And they said, well, he needs to be in the class. You don't have a choice. This Ed Dwight guy, he has to be in the class to become an astronaut. So they put him in the class. They extended how many people. They gave this guy a fake rank in the class in the original testing, because he was like number 23 or 26. He was at the very bottom, and they instead said he was number 15. And they were originally going to only have 8 people, but then they decided, okay, well, we'll make the class 15 people. We'll make this guy number 15, and the class will have 15 people. So they did that, and he didn't make it through the class because he wasn't cut out for it. But they really tried to force him through. They gave him his individual tutors and all this stuff. They gave him extra time, extra flight time, all this stuff, just to try and force this black pilot to become an astronaut so Kennedy could get his black man on the moon. And I don't know, it's a lot of stuff that you aren't going to hear about. So I definitely recommend this one as well. I recommend every book I read. They're all good. And then last, I mentioned when I talked about Hero of Our Time that I read a book about the Caucasian War. So here is the last book I read this year. I just finished like the day before Christmas. So yeah, it's just about the Caucasian War. It lasted for 60 years. A little longer actually, because it was separated into kind of two campaigns, the conquest of the East Caucasus and the West Caucasus. This ends with the capture of Shamil in the East Caucasus. I believe it's the East. Let me see. Yeah, the East. So this was about the stops. So he wrote this in 1860. The actual conquest of the West Caucasus didn't finish until a few years after. So that's where he ends. He ends with the conquest of the East. And it's just about this war that happened between the Russians and the tribes in the Caucasus. They lived in this kind of mountainous highlands, very easy to defend area, very hard to invade, but it would have given the Russians a very strategic advantage. So they put a lot of effort into fighting these Caucasians, which, I mean, the term Caucasian now usually just means white people, but that's not what they mean here. They mean the actual region. Yeah, you can see on the covers one of these cities. They called them Alls, and very easy to defend, position very defensible, and anyone trying to come up here you're gonna have a hard time, especially before airplanes and tanks and whatever vehicles. Even though I think even vehicles would have a hard time in this rocky terrain. This was the 1860s, so they had simple firearms, and that's about it. And they would often lose thousands of Russians just to kill maybe a dozen of these Highlanders and take a position. So they were constantly losing and regaining land, and they would conquer one tribe and move on to another, and the tribe they conquered would turn on them and kick them out, and they'd have to go back. And it was just this constant back and forth until they got this new commander-in-chief who kind of got everything together and got a plan and conquered the Caucasus for real. So he talks about that in here. It's fairly short. And if you're looking for kind of battle plans and battle lines, there isn't really anything like that because there weren't really any battles the way we think of it. It was just these little skirmishes here and there for scraps of land until they finally captured the leader of these tribes. They finally cornered him and captured him. And I guess he lived out his life pretty peacefully. I looked him up afterwards, and I think he was in like Kiev or something, just living his life. He was a political prisoner, but still able to go out and mingle and live in the city. And he wrote letters. There were letters that he wrote that are, I guess, preserved, that say he was enjoying his life. So I guess the Russians treated him well after all that trouble. But yeah, so this really gives you kind of a perspective into a hero of our time and the time that Lermontov himself lived in, because he also lived in this area and died in this area. He was shot in a duel, very much like the character in his novel. A duel like the one in the novel, not like the main character. But it was basically like in the same location too. It's kind of strange, like he wrote about his own death. But as far as this book goes, if you're thinking about, he's going to have troop numbers and battle lines, there are going to be maps and everything, there isn't really any of that. Although I do wish there were maps of the Caucasus, at least in this book. There are no maps. I love maps in books like this, just to give you an idea of the tribes, where they lived, and maybe kind of a year-by-year trace of where the territory that the Russians went through. I think that would be useful if there's ever a second edition of this put out by the good folks at Antelope Hill. I still have a lot of books by them that I have to read. It's kind of a meme on their Twitter page, the unread Antelope Hill books. But I made some progress this year, and hopefully next year I'll make some more progress. Or I guess I made some progress last year, and hopefully this year I make some more progress. So that's it. That's all I read last year. I also read a ebook for The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is about central banking and the formation of the Federal Reserve. Pretty interesting. When I looked it up afterwards, it's talked about, the Wikipedia page says it's like a conspiracy theory book. But when I tried to verify everything in the book, it all checked out. So maybe they believe that the conclusions he draws are a conspiracy theory, but he draws them from facts. And I don't think that a world government is going to happen anytime soon. But the ideas, the history that he puts out in there, there's no Illuminati, there's no shape-shifting reptilians making these calls, it isn't the Jews, it's none of this stuff. He just talks about these bankers making these deals, which you can go back and verify yourself. And I didn't verify everything, but I looked up a few things, and most of it checked out. There were a few things that I would just consider little mistakes, not really a conspiracy or misinformation. Like he says, John Maynard Keynes was a Fabian socialist, but Keynes was never... So the Fabians were like a specific society of socialists, and he never was a member of that society, but he did espouse the same views, the same beliefs that society held. So I can see why the author put that, even though it's not necessarily correct, but I don't think it really matters at the end of the day. Yeah, that's it for my reads for last year. this year, I would like to finish Dio's History of Rome. I'm reading the Dune Saga right now. And I would like to read other works by Francis Parker Yockey. He wrote Imperium, which is like a Spenglerian work, maybe you would call it. Just like his take on Oswald Spengler and his attempt to extend Oswald Spengler's writing to his time, which I think was maybe the 1960s. Let me look up when he died. Yeah, he died in 1960. So that's that. So yeah, I want to read his Imperium. I want to read his World in Flames, which is a collection of his shorter works, shorter essays. And I would like to read Might of the West, which is another Spenglerian. I don't even know if that's a term that people use, but I'm using it. By some guy named Lawrence Brown. And he wrote this book called Might of the West. And I would like to read that. I thought about reading it on stream. It's a little bit longer, so maybe not. I'll have to think about it. I think it's almost 600 pages. So those are like kind of the main things I want to read this year. But again, plans change. Like I said, I planned to read a bunch of Greek philosophy last year, and then I ended up reading almost nothing from the Greek philosophy. Just some comedies and tragedies. What else do we have? I read some history too, but yeah, nothing by Plato or Aristotle like I was planning on doing. I'd also like to read some of David Irving's books. He has written a lot of World War II history. And I spent a lot of money to buy his books, so I would like to read them. He wrote a book on Himmler. I think that's the first one I want to read. He's a pretty interesting character, and people don't really talk about him in depth. So I'm looking forward to seeing what David Irving has to say about Himmler. So that's really my plan for this year as far as my reading goes. As far as streaming goes, which that's what I do here, I stream. I'd like to finish Mega Man X, the series. So we did X5. I hated it, and I've been putting it off, and it's like, all right, I just need to suck it up and finish. I just need to finish X6 or start X6 even. X7 and X8, just be fucking done, and then I can move on to Mega Man Zero, which I hear is better. So that's my goal for that. I'd also like to play some Sonic the Hedgehog on stream. I've only played one Sonic game ever, actually two. One I played at a friend's house. I don't know which one it was, but we stayed up all night and ate candy and drank soda until I finished. It's the one with Metal Sonic on the Sega. That's all I remember from that. And then when I was in high school, of course, I played the shit out of Sonic Adventure 2. A lot of time in the Chow Garden, as is obligatory. But I'd like to play the first Sonic. I'd like to play Sonic the Hedgehog. I'd like to play Sonic 2. I'd like to play Sonic and Knuckles. I just want to play like all the mainline Sonic games on stream. Maybe not all of them this year, but at least like the Sega Genesis ones this year. I think we can do that. Maybe even get into the 3D era. Who knows? I would like to get a capture card and play some Nintendo Switch games. One of my favorite games growing up is Super Mario RPG. I got the Switch remake for my birthday in October. I still haven't played it because I've been like, man, I want to play it on stream. So that might be coming up. I need to get a capture card and figure out how it works first, though. I think you might need a TV, which kind of throws a wrench in my plans because I don't have a TV. Well, I do, but it isn't plugged in, and it's it's holding up my wall in the living room, you know. So yeah, Mega Man X, Sonic, get a capture card. Maybe play another Silent Hill game. Who knows? But I have some horror games I want to play. I have some NES games I want to play. Because I was doing that series where I was beating old games from my childhood. I beat Battletoads. I beat Ninja Gaiden. I did all this stuff on stream. And there's this game called Deadly Towers that I still have to go through. I even beat Ninja Turtles. So those are kind of some plans that I have, some things to look forward to for this year. During the spring, I will have a period at work where I won't be able to stream, just like every year. So that will mean no streams for a little while in the spring. But I do think that we have achievable goals for the year for our streaming. So I'm looking forward to taking care of some of those games, just getting them off the list, you know. So that's it. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed my kind of review of the books. Maybe you thought it was interesting. Maybe you got some ideas for something that you would want to read. I don't know. I know some of the things I read can be a little off-putting to some people, but others I think are pretty universal. I mean, a hero of our time, I think anyone could read that. Sophocles, Aeschylus, all these people, you know, anyone could read those and be entertained by them. The Iliad and the Odyssey. If you have any interest in history, I definitely recommend the story of the Russian land. And yeah, so I hope you enjoyed that little review of the year. And thank you for being with me again today. Thank you, Elephant Puppet and Angela Monster and Hernan, for stopping by. Anyone who is lurking, thank you for stopping by. And I'll see you all next weekend. It's going to be a little short weekend for me. I'm heading back to work on Tuesday, and you know, you got to make up for lost time and all that. So I'll be working on Friday, which I usually don't. But I'll try to get at least one stream in, hopefully two. And I'll probably be done with the first Dune book by then. I have less than 100 pages left, so I'll definitely be done. But maybe even done with the second one, who knows? But yeah, probably be Mega Man X. That's kind of what I'm leaning towards. X6. And I'll see you then. Bye.